They built 31 cabins on my private peninsula, and my revenge plan was simple. Wait until they were done. I stood at the edge of my drive, silent, as the HOA president smirked like a queen on her throne, calling me a trespasser on the land I'd spent my life shaping. Her bulldozers crushed through the rose garden I had planted for my late wife, Eleanor, their treads grinding the petals into the dirt. The air reeked of oil and arrogance. This wasn't just a patch of ground to me. It was a monument to love, a promise carved into earth and memory. And they were trampling it as if it were nothing. At the town meeting, they waved their counterfeit surveys and polished maps in my face, laughing as they turned my heritage into a punchline. But their laughter was hollow, because buried beneath their million-dollar dream was a truth they had no idea existed. A truth older than most of them, rotting quietly in the soil for 40 years. And when that secret rose to the surface, it would swallow them whole. Where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments, because you're about to witness a bully get exactly what she deserves. And if you believe no HOA should ever have the power to erase a family's legacy, hit subscribe so you never miss another story of justice finally finding its mark. The morning air smelled like pine needles and sawdust, the kind of scent that clings to the skin and stays. I was sanding the edge of a new cedar window frame, feeling each smooth stroke beneath my fingers, the wood's grain whispering like a heartbeat. Every piece of this place was built by my own 2 hands. Decades of sweat, splinters, and stubborn love poured into something real for Eleanor. This peninsula wasn't property. It was a promise I refused to break. When the chemo drained her strength, she'd sit on the porch, wrapped in her blanket, listening to the hush of the lake. The sound always gave her peace. She called it our sanctuary. After she was gone, finishing the cabin became more than a project. It became my reason to keep breathing. My plan was simple: retire here, surrounded by quiet waters, old trees, and memories that hummed like distant music. But that peace shattered one morning with the crunch of tires on my gravel road. I wasn't expecting anyone. Folks from the Lakeview Meadows development rarely came this far down. They knew better. My grandfather's old private property sign still stood by the stone wall like a sentinel. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked toward the gate. A sleek black sedan sat on the other side, dusted with road grit it clearly wasn't used to. Beside it stood a woman in a pressed gray pantsuit, posture straight as a fence post, a clipboard tucked against her side like a holstered weapon. 2 younger men flanked her, each holding their own clipboards, trying to look official. I recognized her instantly. Mara Trent, Lakeview HOA's new president. I'd seen her smug photo in the community newsletter. That thin smile stretched across her face like it hurt to hold. She wore it now, though her eyes were colder than the lake in winter. "Mr. Halpern," she said, syrup dripping from her tone. "I'm Mara Trent with the Lakeview Homeowners Association. These gentlemen are with our planning committee." I didn't bother opening the gate. My palms rested on the iron bars, the metal cool beneath my hands. "I know who you are," I said, "and I know the HOA doesn't have jurisdiction this far out on the point." Her smile twitched, a hairline crack in her confidence. "Actually," she replied smoothly, "that's what we're here to clarify. The board has approved development for a lakefront community initiative. We'll be repurposing this unused peninsula for the construction of 31 luxury lake cabins." Something inside me froze solid. My gaze drifted past her shoulder toward the woods, Eleanor's woods, and there they were, thin pink flags fluttering between the trees, climbing closer to the cabin like a slow invasion. I hadn't noticed them before. To an engineer's eye, the pattern was unmistakable. They were marking boundaries, and not legally. "Repurposing?" I repeated, my voice flat as stone. "This isn't unused land. It's mine. The entire peninsula has been mine for 60 years. Mara's laugh was sharp and shallow, the sound of ice cubes rattling in an empty glass. She tapped the clipboard once. "Our records disagree, Mr. Halpern. The plat map on file shows this parcel as community property." The 2 men behind her nodded like obedient bobbleheads. "My grandfather bought this land," I said slowly. "My father built the first fishing dock. I built this cabin for my wife before she died." My throat tightened. "We've lived, loved, and buried our history here." I lifted my chin. "I have the deed. The original county survey maps. They're inside." I wasn't challenging her. I was reasoning with her. Engineer to bureaucrat. Facts, logic, paperwork. That was my mistake. Mara's world wasn't one of facts. It was built on politics, connections, and intimidation. "I'm sure you have plenty of old paperwork," she said sweetly, venom coating every word. "But official filings are what count. The budget's been approved, the plan's finalized, and our contractors break ground tomorrow." Her eyes drifted over my shoulder toward the cabin, not with admiration, but calculation. She looked at Eleanor's rose bushes, as if estimating their removal cost. It was clear then. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a hostile takeover. "You're trespassing," I said, my voice low but steady. "You, your committee, your contractors, you're not to step 1 foot past this gate." Her smile fell away completely. What replaced it was something colder. "You need to understand your position, Mr. Halpern. The community has spoken. You can cooperate or we'll classify you as a squatter." She turned sharply. "We'll be back at 8 tomorrow morning to begin clearing." And with that, she left, her clipboard soldiers marching behind her. The sedan pulled away, leaving a choking cloud of dust that settled on the gate like an insult carved in the air. I stood there, staring at the pink flags twisting in the breeze. Each one felt like a nail hammered into Eleanor's memory. Inside, I pulled the old military lockbox from beneath the bed and opened it. Inside lay the proof, the original deed, the worn plat map. My grandfather's signature faded but firm. Solid, tangible proof. I ran my thumb over the ink, breathing steady for the first time in hours. The rest of that day passed in a blur of anger and resolve. I laid the papers out, drafted my case, rehearsed my words. Tomorrow, I would show them the truth. I would stop them. They couldn't just erase a lifetime. But when dawn came, I didn't hear a knock on the gate. I heard a deep, guttural growl rumbling through the floorboards. By the time I reached the window, my heart was already sinking. 2 yellow bulldozers sat in the mist, engines idling, their steel tracks already scarring the soil. They hadn't stopped at the gate. They'd gone through it, crushing everything in their path. Only a few yards separated them from Eleanor's roses. My first instinct was to run out, hold up the deed, scream until they stopped. But an old man against 10 tons of steel, that story never ends with the old man standing. This wasn't a fight for fists. It was a fight of paper and principle. Hands trembling, I went inside, picked up the phone, and called the county assessor's office. I gave my parcel number, my name, the details, keeping my voice as calm as I could. The woman on the other end typed slowly, her tone bored and distant. "Halpern, right? Okay. Parcel 7B, the Peninsula." There was a pause. "Looks like that was consolidated into the Lakeview Meadows community plat last year." My stomach dropped. "Consolidated? That's impossible. I have the original deed. It's been in my family for 60 years. A sigh crackled through the line, the sound of someone who stopped caring a long time ago. "Sir, I'm just telling you what the system says. As of last May, that land belongs to the HOA. The phone felt heavy in my hand. It was like calling the hospital and being told you'd been declared dead last May, and nothing you said could change it. I hung up. The drone of the bulldozers outside suddenly feeling 10 times louder, 10 times more final. For a moment, panic threatened to swamp me, but discipline kicks in when you need it. I forced myself to breathe. The county was wrong. A clerk had made a mistake. I just needed to show them the real proof. I walked over to the old military issue lockbox tucked away in my closet. It was heavy, olive drab and cold to the touch. The lock clicked open with a familiar sound, and the smell of old paper and ink filled the small room. I carefully lifted out the file containing the deed. The paper was thick, slightly yellowed. The lines from the county clerk's typewriter, still sharp and black. The 1/1983 transfer date was right there. Below it, a plat map drawn with an engineer's precision showing the clear boundary line that separated my peninsula from the development. This was it. This was salvation. You can't argue with a document like this. Hope sharp and clear. Cut through the dread. I found the number for a local real estate attorney someone had mentioned at the hardware store. A guy named Bill Peterson, who'd been around forever. I got an appointment for that afternoon. Sitting in his dusty office, surrounded by stacks of legal books, I felt that hope begin to curdle. I laid the deed and the map on his desk. He looked at them with a practiced eye, running a finger over the boundary line. Hell listened patiently as I explained everything. Mara, Trent, the bulldozers, the call to the assessor. When I was finished, he leaned back in his creaky leather chair and looked at me with weary, sympathetic eyes. "Tom," he said, and I knew from his tone it was bad news. "The deed is real. The map is real. The problem is what they did is probably on paper legal." He explained it in simple terms. No fancy lawyer talk. The HOA had hired a slick firm to exploit an old obscure loophole called clerical consolidation. They'd commissioned a new survey, a fake one, he suspected, that simply absorbed my land into their master plat. They filed it quietly. No public notice required, and the understaffed county office had rubber-stamped it. "It's a form of paper theft," Peterson said, shaking his head. "They count on guys like you not having the $20,000, $30,000 it'll take to fight their corporate lawyers in court for 2 years. By the time you get a judge to even look at it, the cabins will be built and sold. The air left my lungs. The system I had trusted hadn't just failed me. It had been used as the weapon to rob me. When I got home, they'd already put up a chain-link fence. A brutal silver gash across the landscape, cutting me off from the main part of the peninsula. My boat ramp, the one my dad and I built, was on the other side. They'd posted a sign, community property, no trespassing. The next day, I found a bright orange fine taped to my front door. $100 for encroachment of personal effects onto community grounds. They were finding me for my own woodshed. It was a calculated cruelty, designed to break me down piece by piece. The final crushing blow came a week later. I was sitting on the porch nursing a cup of coffee when one of the bulldozers turned its attention toward the cabin. I thought they were just clearing more brush, but then it lowered its blade. I watched frozen as the machine chewed into the earth right where Eleanor's rose garden had been. The roots of the bushes she'd babied through 2 seasons of chemo were torn from the ground and pushed aside like trash. They didn't just take the land. They took the last living thing she had planted. They bulldozed her memory to make way for a gravel access road. That night, something inside me broke. Or maybe it was forged into something new. The shock was gone. The hurt was gone. The part of me that wanted to reason with them was dead and buried under that gravel. I walked down to the small dock I still had access to, the old lockbox in my hand. I sat on the edge as dusk settled over the lake, the water turning to black glass. I pulled out the deed, its paper soft in my callous hands. It wasn't just a claim to the land anymore. It was a promise. They thought I was a broken old man beaten by paperwork and bureaucracy. They thought they had won. I looked across the water at the skeletons of the first cabin frames rising against the sunset. A quiet resolve settled over me as cold and still as the lake. Let them build. Every nail they drive into their own coffin. The anger didn't burn hot. It cooled into something dense and patient. An engineer doesn't get mad at a problem. He studies it, finds the tolerances, and identifies the stress points. The HOA was now my problem, and I began to study it with a cold, methodical focus. Months bled into one another. Summer turned to fall. The vibrant green of the trees around the lake mellowing to gold and rust. The constant soundtrack to my life became the whine of saws, the pop of nail guns, and the rumble of cement trucks. From my porch, I had a perfect view of their progress. I watched as they poured 31 identical concrete slabs, then raised the skeletons of 31 identical cabins. To everyone else, I had become the ghost of the peninsula, a bitter old man who had lost his fight. Neighbors who used to wave now looked away, their faces tight with a mixture of pity and fear. Mara Trent had made an example of me, and no one wanted to be next. They saw me puttering in my small workshop or sitting on my dock, and they assumed I was defeated. They were wrong. I was documenting. Every morning just after the sun came up and before the work crews arrived, I would send up the drone. It was a small, quiet one, barely a hum against the whisper of the wind over the lake. From 200 FT up, I captured crystal-clear footage of their progress. Each video was time-stamped, dated, and saved to a hard drive, filed away in a folder labeled Evidence. I mapped their every move, from the laying of the first utility lines to the nailing of the last roof shingle. I wasn't just recording construction. I was recording a crime in high definition. My afternoons were for search. I drove to the county records office once a week, becoming a familiar face to the clerks. I never mentioned the dispute. I just acted like a retiree with a new hobby. I filed Freedom of Information requests for every single permit the HOA had pulled for their Lakefront Community Initiative. The paperwork came back in a thick manila envelope. I spread the documents across my quote kitchen table and found exactly what I was looking for. Permit after permit listed a parcel ID, the one for the main Lakeview Meadows development, not the ID for my peninsula, Lot 7B. They were building with legal permits, but on the wrong piece of land. It was a small detail, a single digit off in a long string of numbers. But in engineering, the small details are where foundations crack. My isolation had one advantage. It made my few allies more valuable. Ralph Clevenger was one of them. We'd served in different branches, different decades, but we shared the same quiet understanding that came with a uniform. We'd meet for coffee at a diner 10 mi out of town. Ralph was a retired county surveyor, a man who spoke in terms of elevations and degrees. I slid my old plat map and a copy of the HOA's new survey across the vinyl tabletop. He put on his reading glasses and studied them for a long time, the silence broken only by the clink of coffee cups. Finally, he took a sip and pushed the maps back to me. "Well, Tom," he said with a dry chuckle, "somebody's compass is busted. Your map puts the boundary line right at the old stone wall. Theirs moves it a good 200 ft onto your land to include the entire shoreline." He tapped the HOA's map. "This is sloppy. It's like they just drew a line where they wanted it to be and called it official." In the HOA's monthly newsletter, which still got shoved in my mailbox. Mara Trent was gloating. There was a picture of her in a hard hat, pointing at one of the cabin frames, her smile wide and victorious. She wrote a column calling the project a testament to community investment, and referred to the successful reclamation of underutilized common land, making a veiled jab at the bitter old squatter who had tried to stand in the way of progress. Her arrogance was my cover. While she was posing for pictures, I was walking the real property line, the one my grandfather had walked. Deep in the brush, half swallowed by thorns and ivy near the shoreline, was something I hadn't thought about in years. It was an old county survey benchmark, a small brass disc set in a concrete post, marking a fixed and legally recognized point. The original surveyors had used it to map out all the lots in this area back in the 40s. The HOA's new convenient survey had conveniently ignored it. I spent a whole weekend carefully clearing the brush around it. I scrubbed the brass plate with a wire brush until the stamped letters were clear. U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey. It was still there. It was real. I called Ralph. He came out the next day with his equipment, setting up a tripod over the marker. He took his readings, checked his charts, and then walked over to where I was standing. He looked at the rows of nearly finished cabins, then back at the benchmark, and then at me. A slow smile spread across his face. "Tom," he said, his voice quiet, but ringing with the weight of absolute certainty. "If that marker is still active in the county system, this whole project's on your land." Ralph confirmed it. 2 days later, the benchmark was still active, still the official reference point in the county's master file. This wasn't just a competing survey. It was the difference between fact and fiction. For a brief, naive moment, I thought this was the end of it. All I had to do was show them the proof. The truth, I believed, would be enough. So, I put on a clean collared shirt, gathered my documents, the old plat map, Ralph's new photos of the benchmark, a print out of the county's active marker registry, and drove to the next HOA meeting. The meetings were held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with folding chairs and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and suburban politics. Marla Trent sat at a long table at the front, flanked by her board members, reigning over the room with a plastic gavel and a condescending smile. I waited patiently through the monotonous discussions about lawn maintenance and parking violations. Finally, Mara opened the floor to homeowner comments. I stood up and walked to the microphone at the front of the room. A quiet murmur went through the crowd. I was the ghost of the Peninsula, and I had come to haunt them. "My name is Tom Halpern," I said, my voice steady. "Some of you know the situation with my property on the Peninsula." Mara's smile tightened into a thin, dismissive line. "Mr. Halpern," she interrupted, her voice dripping with fake patience. "This has been addressed. The board considers the matter closed." I ignored her. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, my neighbors. Some looked hostile, some uncomfortable, most just indifferent. "I have some new information I think the board in this community should see." I calmly walked to the table and laid down the old plat map. I placed the photograph of the rediscovered survey marker next to it. "This is the original county plat map for my property, Lot 7B, I explained, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "And this is a photograph of the official U.S. Geodetic Survey benchmark that establishes the legal boundary. A benchmark your contracted surveyor seems to have missed. According to this legally binding marker, every cabin you are currently building is being built squarely on my private property." For a second, there was a stunned silence. I saw a flicker of doubt on the faces of a couple of the board members. But Mara was a master of controlling a room. She picked up my photograph, held it up with 2 fingers as if it were something dirty, and let out a sharp theatrical laugh. "A survey marker?" she said, turning to the crowd. "Mr. Halpern, are you serious? You come in here with some dusty old map and a picture of a piece of metal you found in the weeds, and you expect us to halt a multi-million-dollar community investment?" She dropped the photo on the table. "Folks, what you're seeing here is a man who can't accept that he lost. He's become a conspiracy YouTuber with crayons drawing his own lines on a map because he doesn't like the real one." The crowd tittered. The tension in the room broke, replaced by chuckles of derision. My proof, my solid engineering facts, had been reduced to a joke. My neighbors, people I'd known for years, laughed along with her. Humiliation is a strange thing. It's a heat that starts in your ears and spreads down your neck. I stood there for a moment, the sound of their laughter washing over me. I looked at Mara, who was now basking in the support of her audience, her eyes glittering with triumph. I didn't say another word. I calmly gathered my papers, turned, and walked out of the clubhouse. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I just left them to their laughter. That was the moment I realized they weren't just mistaken. They were committed to their lie. Truth wouldn't beat them. It had to be something stronger. The next morning, I found my mailbox smashed, flattened by a baseball bat or a piece of pipe. Later that day, I noticed the window of my workshop was shattered. A rock lay on the floor amidst the broken glass. It was a message, clumsy but clear. "Shut up and go away." Ralph called when he heard. "You should file a police report, Tom," he urged. "This is escalation. It's vandalism." I looked at the shattered glass, the dented mailbox. Part of me wanted to, but a bigger part, the cold, calculating part that was now in control, saw an opportunity. "No," I told him quietly. "Let them." He was silent for a moment. "What's your plan, Tom? Let them finish the cabins," I said, the words feeling more certain than anything I'd ever said. "Let them feel safe. Let them feel victorious. Let them drive every nail and connect every wire. Let them invest every last dollar." Their overconfidence was now my greatest asset. They thought I was done. They thought they had beaten the old man into submission. Good. I needed them confident. I recorded the damage with my camera, filed the photos away with the drone footage, and went back to work. I had more research to do. They had just shown me how far they were willing to go. Now I knew how far I had to go. The public humiliation at the meeting was a gift. It solidified Mara's control and derrised any lingering doubts among the homeowners. They saw me as a crank, a harmless old fool who'd been put in his place. Their pity was the perfect camouflage. Behind the scenes, I shifted from gathering evidence to building a weapon. The survey marker was the core of my strategy, but on its own, it was just a piece of metal. I needed to wrap it in the full, undeniable authority of the law. I needed paperwork that couldn't be laughed out of a room. Ralph, feeling the sting of Mara's dismissal of his profession, dug deeper. He pulled the digital records for the HOA's survey. What he found was the critical flaw, the hairline crack in their foundation. The surveyor they'd hired wasn't a fraud. He was just lazy. Instead of doing the field work and locating the physical benchmark, he had pulled GPS coordinates from a cheap, outdated county GIS data set. It was the digital equivalent of using a wrinkled road map instead of a precision instrument. His entire survey, the very document their claim rested on, was based on a flawed starting point. He'd drawn a perfect map of the wrong piece of land. Armed with this knowledge, I reached out to another old friend, a retired county assessor named Henry Mills. Henry was the kind of man who believed that properly filed documents were the bedrock of civilization. When I laid out the two maps in his cluttered home office, my original and the HOA's, his face hardened. "It's paper theft, Tom," he said, echoing my lawyer's words, but with the fire of an insider's indignation. "They used a bureaucratic shortcut to steal your land, hoping nobody would have the skill or the patience to unravel it." He agreed to help. Over the next few weeks, Henry and I became a two-man audit team. We went to the county archives and pulled certified copies of everything. The original deed transfer from 1983, the parcel maps, the tax records. We got it all notarized, stamped, and sealed with a level of official that would be impossible to dismiss. Then came the master stroke. The old deed was legally sound, but its property description used landmarks from a bygone era, from the old oak tree to the stone wall. We hired Ralph to create a new legal description, translating those old landmarks into modern GPS coordinates, all anchored to that one immovable, legally active benchmark. It cost me $200 in filing fees to re-record the updated deed with the county. It was the best $200 I'd ever spent. My old dusty claim was now fully active in the modern system with digital coordinates that any surveyor in the country could verify in seconds. My ownership was no longer a matter of history. It was a current verifiable fact. The final piece was the quietest, but the most powerful. Following my lawyer's grudging advice, I had him draw up a quiet title action. It's a legal document that asks a court to clear up any confusion about who owns a piece of property. It officially named the Lakeview Meadows HOA as trespassers and their entire development as an encroachment. It was a declaration of war written in the dry, emotionless language of the law. But instead of filing it immediately, I had the lawyer keep it sealed, ready to be submitted at a moment's notice. It was my ace in the hole, a legal hand grenade waiting for him to pull the pin. Meanwhile, the construction on the peninsula reached its final stages. The cabins were no longer skeletons. They had siding, windows, and newly seeded patches of lawn. They looked pristine, profitable, and permanent. The HOA announced a grand ribbon-cutting ceremony. They invited local press, a few city council members, and the entire community. It was to be Mara Trent's victory lab, a celebration of her vision and power. The day of the ceremony was bright and sunny. I watched from my porch as cars filled the new gravel lot where Eleanor's roses used to be. I saw Mara dressed in a bright red Powers suit, greeting people, her smile wider and more triumphant than ever. She was the queen of her newly conquered kingdom. I stayed out of sight, just a shadow behind my own window. I watched them set up a podium and a sound system. I watched the local news van arrive. They were creating the perfect stage, not for their victory, but for their downfall. As Mara walked toward the microphone to begin her speech, I stood up from my chair and picked up the folder on my table. It contained everything. The original deed, the certified copy, the re-recorded version with the new coordinates, Ralph's report, photos of the benchmark, everything. I felt a profound sense of calm. All the anger, the frustration, the humiliation of the past months had been forged into this single, quiet purpose. It was time. As I walked out my door and started toward the crowd, I whispered to myself, time to pull the pin. I walked through the crowd with a purpose they hadn't seen from me before. People parted ways, their expressions a mix of confusion and annoyance. They were here for a party, and I was the ghost at the feast. Marlo was at the podium, beaming. The microphone, amplifying her voice across the newly manicured lawns. The local news camera was rolling, live streaming her moment of glory. A triumph of community vision, she was saying, her words dripping with self-congratulation. When we started this project, there were naysayers. There were those who clung to the past, who couldn't see the bright future we were building. But we persevered. A smattering of polite applause followed. That was my cue. I didn't rush. I walked at a steady, deliberate pace right up to the side of the stage. The two clipboard lackey from our first meeting moved to intercept me, but they stopped short, uncertain. I wasn't shouting or making a scene. I just looked like an old man with a folder. Mara's eyes narrowed when she saw me. A flash of anger crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with a condescending smile for the cameras. "Well, look who it is," she said into the microphone. "Mr. Halpern, have you come to congratulate us?" The crowd chuckled. I didn't answer her directly. I stepped up beside the podium into the camera's frame and opened my folder. The air grew still. The murmuring died down. Every eye was on me. I held up the first document. A certified copy of the original deed. Its paper thick and official-looking. My voice when I spoke didn't need the microphone. It was calm, clear, and carried the weight of absolute fact. Lot 7B Peninsula, Lake. View County, registered in 1983 to Thomas Halpern. Still active. I placed it on the podium in front of her. Then I held up the second document, the newly recorded deed with Ralph's precise survey coordinates. Lot 7B Peninsula, Lakeview County. Re-recorded and certified last month with modern GPS coordinates anchored to the official county benchmark. Still active and still mine. Gasps rippled through the audience. This wasn't a dusty map. These were legally binding documents fresh from the county clerk's office. Mara stared at the papers, her triumphant smile frozen on her face. Her mind was racing, trying to find a way to spin this to dismiss it as another trick. "This is absurd," she stammered, grabbing the microphone. "This is a desperate stunt. Security, someone get this man off the stage." But nobody moved. My timing had been perfect. I had invited a couple of guests of my own. A young, hungry reporter from the county paper, whom I'd fed the story to a week prior, stepped forward with his own camera. And standing near him was a man in a county official's jacket. A senior field assessor Henry had called in as a favor. The assessor stepped up to the second microphone, which had been set up for the city council members. "I can confirm," the man said, his voice professional and unimpeachable. "The benchmark located at the edge of this property is active and is the legal point of origin for this parcel. Any construction east of that marker is, according to our official records, an encroachment on private property." The reporter's camera flashed. The word encroachment hung in the air, cold and devastating. The entire legal foundation of their project had just evaporated. Live on camera, Mara's face went from pale to beet red. The mask of the calm, competent community manager shattered. "He's lying. This is harassment. Deputy, do something." She pointed a shaking finger at a uniformed officer standing at the edge of the crowd. Deputy Carl Bishop. I'd known Carl since he was a kid chasing frogs by the lake. He used to fish off my dock with his dad. He was a good man who had no patience for bullies. Carl walked forward slowly, his expression unreadable. Mara's face flooded with relief. She thought he was coming to save her. He walked right past me, stopped at the edge of the stage, and looked up at her. He didn't raise his voice. "He didn't have to, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of the law. "According to the county assessor and these certified documents, you're the one on private property. I suggest you and your guests vacate the premises." The collective intake of breath from the crowd was audible. The humiliation was total, public, and undeniable. Mara's jaw worked, but no sound came out. The board members behind her were in a state of panic, whispering frantically to each other, avoiding eye contact. Their paper kingdom had just crumbled. One of them, a lawyer in a rumpled suit, finally found his voice. "We'll sue you for this," he blustered, pointing a finger at me. "This is slander, tortious interference." I looked at him. Then, at the 31 brand new, beautifully finished cabins, all sitting on land that wasn't theirs, a small, genuine smile touched my lips. For the first time in months, I turned back to the microphone. "You can't sue," I said, my voice calm and final, "from land you don't own." The aftermath was not a storm, but a quiet, steady dismantling. The fallout from that disastrous ribbon-cutting ceremony was immediate and catastrophic for the HOA. The video, filmed by the local news and quickly uploaded, went viral in our small community. The story was simple and devastating. Veterans' land stolen by HOA. With the public humiliation, the entire edifice of Mara Trent's power collapsed. Within a week, the county dispatched a formal survey crew. They spent 2 days on the peninsula planting new stakes and taking precise measurements. Their official report was a carbon copy of what Ralph and I already knew. All 31 cabins, the new road and the utility lines had been built on my deed land. The legal term they used was bad faith encroachment, meaning the HOA couldn't even claim it was an honest mistake. Not after I'd warned them at that public meeting. The legal hand grenade I'd kept in my pocket, the quiet title action, was finally filed. The court ruling was swift and final. The title to my land was cleared of all competing claims, and the 31 cabins were legally declared encroachments on my property. Under state law, that meant they now belonged to me. The HOA's multi-million-dollar investment was gone, transferred to me in the stroke of a judge's pen. Their problems were just beginning. The insurance company that had backed the project immediately voided their policy, citing gross negligence and misrepresentation of the property lines. Suddenly, the HOA was on the hook for the entire construction loan with no assets to show for it. Panic turned to betrayal as board members turned on one another. During the county's investigation into the permit fraud using the wrong parcel ID for every filing, a quiet hero emerged. The HOA secretary, a mousy woman named Dee, who I'd seen taking notes at every meeting, came forward as a whistleblower. She provided investigators with meeting recordings and internal emails showing that Mara had knowingly pushed the project forward, forging signatures on several key documents and falsifying permit applications to bypass proper review. 2 weeks after her moment of triumph, Mara Trent was arrested. I saw the picture in the paper. No power suit, no smug smile, just a woman in handcuffs, looking small and defeated, being led out of her house. The charges were serious. Multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement of HOA funds. She had not only stolen my land on paper, but she had been skimming off the top of the construction budget. Her kingdom had been built on a foundation of lies, and it had crumbled into dust. I had no interest in being a landlord for 31 cabins. That wasn't the point. This was never about money. It was about restoration. Working with a reputable real estate agent, I put the cabins up for sale, not as HOA-controlled rentals, but as private property, free and clear. The demand was high, and they sold quickly. With the proceeds, I established a scholarship fund at the local community college in Eleanor's name. It was designated for veterans and their children who wanted to learn a skilled trade. Carpentry, electrical, surveying, the men and women who build things the right way. It felt like the perfect tribute tour, turning the loneliest chapter of my life into something that would build a better future for others. My neighbors started to come around one by one. They'd show up at my gate, hesitant, offering apologies. They had been afraid of Mara, caught up in the group mentality. They didn't hold any grudges. Fear makes people do things they aren't proud of. I just nodded and accepted. And soon, the invisible wall between my property and the community came down. The quiet solidarity of neighbors helping neighbors began to return. This morning I sat on my dock at dawn, a warm cup of coffee in my hands. The water was still, reflecting the soft colors of the rising sun. The chain-link fence is gone. The sound of construction is gone. The peace has returned. 2 kids from a few houses down were at the end of the dock, casting their fishing lines into the water. Their quiet chatter a welcome replacement for the roar of bulldozers. I had saved the cabin. I had honored my wife's memory. And I had restored not just my property line, but a sense of order and justice. Sometimes justice takes time. It requires patience and precision. Sometimes to prove a point, you have to let them build it first. They thought they were building cabins on my land. But what they were really building was the lesson they and this whole community will never forget. All related for you recently uploaded watched.